Welcome to Headliners Forum. We're here to bring you the best in Texas journalism, the stories behind the great stories. I'm your host, Mark Morrison. Our special guest is Alex Stuckey, investigative reporter of the Houston Chronicle and a Pulitzer winner. Alex won two of the Headliners Foundation's most prestigious prizes, a Gold Showcase Award for High Impact Journalism and a Charles Green Award, Reporter of the Year, that we administer with our partner, the Texas Associated Press Managing Editors. Alex's 2021 series called In Crisis, How Texas Fails the Mentally Ill, exposed a system that is overcrowded, underfunded, and lacks critical safeguards. Her remarkable reporting on how these shortcomings affect human lives and families got the attention of the entire state and triggered some much needed reforms. Alex, congratulations on your outstanding work. We're thrilled to have a chance to discuss how you produced this great series.
Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning. How a single case in a small Northeast Texas town sparked your interest in the broader issue.
Yeah, so I had for several years been kind of thinking about covering mental health hospitals, looking into them. I wrote about one when I was living in Missouri, and when I went to visit it, they made me sign a waiver saying that, like, if you get taken hostage, we will not save you. And it was just as terrifying as you would expect when someone makes you sign a paper like that. And so I, kind of had this in the back of my mind as something that, like, probably wasn't being done well in Texas either. And so I got the opportunity to kind of write about it. I went to my boss and said, I want to write about mental health care in Texas. And she said, what about it? And I said, I'm not sure. And so I just kind of started looking for records, just any kind of records, state violations, federal violations. I pulled police call logs for every psychiatric hospital in the state. And yes, like you mentioned, there was one for the hospital in Rusk State Hospital. It's one of the state's two maximum security mental health facilities. And I was going through the call log, and one of the calls said, it said aggravated assault / murder. And those are two super different things. And so I was like, oh, what is this? And so I requested the documents. There was a court case happening, so I requested the court case documents, and this individual, Don Wallace, was murdered in a maximum security state-run psychiatric hospital. And it just kind of served as unfortunately, a really good example of how the system can fail people in so many ways.
Tell us about his case. What were the circumstances of his death, and how did his family struggle to find out what had happened?
Yeah, so his death was about, what are we at, 6-7 years ago now. And so he had, been struggling with mental health his whole life. He he was he put newspapers all over the windows because he thought, like, spies were coming after him. And, so he was very mentally ill. And his father and his sister were both psychologists. And so, you would think on the surface that it would be so much easier for them to take care of him, right? Like they know all the ins and outs and everything that, like, a lay person wouldn't know. But in fact, what they found was that it didn't help them at all. The system was so broken that they couldn't really help him. And so, they continued to commit him to hospitals, and then he would get released, and he would kind of go back to this psychosis that he was in. And so he was arrested for assaulting a police officer, but he never actually touched the police officer. He was, scared. He took a swing at the officer. It's not unusual for mentally ill individuals to kind of react that way because it's the police who are coming to their house and taking them to a hospital and locking them up, right? So after a certain amount of time, they're just scared of the cops. They don't want to get locked up again. And so he, even though his parents could show the court that he had been committed so many times that he was not competent to stand trial in any way, and he never would be, the judge decided, well, we're just going to like put him in a state hospital for competency restoration. And so it was in that hospital that he encountered a man who had been very violent in the past, was also, of course, mentally ill, and he was beaten to death by this man. And so his parents didn't really know. They still don't really know what happened. The state doesn't release death reports from their state hospitals. You can't get those. They're considered confidential. And so there are still like a fair number of questions about what exactly happened, how it was allowed to happen. We can't get the videos. I was able to kind of piece it together using like the police report, talking to the prosecutor, and also getting kind of like incident logins from employees who were just like signing in and like responsible for the 15-minute checks. And so there's still a lot of open-ended questions, but it's just kind of like, because of how this system is set up, we're probably never going to get the answers that we want.
Yeah, transparency is not too widespread in this industry, and
Yeah.
you do have legitimate medical privacy issues to work with as well. Tell us about some of the obstacles and challenges to putting together all the data you did, the statistics that really had not been available before and visible to Texans. What did these numbers tell you about the state's decline in funding and services?
Yeah, so this is the part of the reason why it took me 16 months to do this. Yeah, so what I found was, I mean, not unlike most things in Texas, there's no data to back anything up, right? Whether that's on purpose or not, I'm not sure that I can speak to that, but it is very hard to kind of find ways to put things together. So we knew that the increase in just from talking to like advocates and stuff, we knew that like the extreme increase in the number of people waiting for psychiatric beds kind of started to happen in the early 2000s when the legislature cut community mental health center funding. And so, people who are mentally ill, there's nowhere for them to go, or there's a wait list at their community mental health center, so they can't get help. So they're on the streets, and then they get worse and worse and worse. And then they end up, getting picked up for trespassing or, attempting to assault a police officer or what have you. These kind of minor crimes. And then, the court says, oh, they seem mentally ill, we don't think they're competent. Well, then they have to wait for a bed in a state hospital to like go through competency restoration. And so, I think that wasn't quite reported before this. And so we sort of put that together. But something that, took the longest for this project was putting together, kind of trying to figure out, if competency restoration was really working, if people were getting the care they needed. And it turns out no. So I went through about 5,000 cases in Harris County of people who had been found incompetent. And so I was able to kind of get a list of names, a very partial list of names from the Harris County District Clerk of people who had been found permanently incompetent, and use that to kind of backtrack and look at all of the cases that had kind of built up around them, right? Most of these people have been picked up many, many times. And the court system thinks, oh, we're going to send them for competency restoration, it will be amazing, like, everything's going to be great, they'll be back to normal. But in reality, what happens is because the civil commitment law in Texas is so stringent, you have to be a danger to yourself or others. There's no, like other states kind of have this deterioration clause in their competency laws. And so we don't have that. So you basically have to be about to kill yourself or to kill someone else to get committed. So essentially what was happening is the court was saying, okay, these people need, to be referred to a mental health facility. And then the interim step, the psychologist who examined them after that order was placed would go, well, they're not a danger to themselves or others, so we're just going to release them. And so that continued to happen. And so there were a lot of people, I think 40% of the people that I looked at, had just been over and over and over again going through the court system thinking that they're helping them, but really they're just being released back onto the street. And some of these cases I looked at, people were coming, they'd be arrested, they'd be released, and 2 weeks later they're back in court again for something minor like trespassing.
One thing that was happening is state-operated hospitals cut back. The state relied more heavily on private hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And you told the story of Alex Blanchard, a mother whose son was allegedly assaulted at one of these private facilities. What happened, and how did this case lead you to some of the issues plaguing these private hospitals?
Yeah, so I kind of found out a little bit by accident that the state has these they're called private psychiatric bed contracts. And because the state hospitals are so full, at the time, I think the wait list to get into one was like 1,000 people long. It is now like 2,500. It is not, we're not doing better. So because those lists were so long and not shrinking, the state was like, I know what we can do. We can contract out to private hospitals for beds. But what I found out was the state had no idea what private hospitals were getting the contracts because they were using kind of middlemen to pick what hospitals were getting the funds. And so what I found was that a lot of these hospitals are very scary, very dangerous. People die at a, alarming amount. There's lots of assaults. Like, these places are not safe. And so I found this family. I was going through court records, and I found this family. The son, he shouldn't have been sent to a mental health hospital anyway, in my opinion. He was very ADHD, acting out in school. The mom was trying to find the right medication. They were struggling to find the right medication. And after one kind of outburst, the mom was pulled into the principal's office and was like, hey, like, you either got to commit him or you gotta he can't come back. And so she took him to not a state hospital, I'm sorry, a private hospital. And he was there for 24 hours. And he was about 5 at the time, and he was left alone in a room with a 13-year-old, and he was beaten by the 13-year-old. And so, it's just another example of like, this is not serving anyone, right? This is not serving anyone to put people in these hospitals that there's not enough individuals kind of looking after these people. They don't have enough employees, they don't have enough resources, that sort of thing.
You talk to many healthcare professionals and administrators, and they made some points too about why things had deteriorated. What was their side of the story?
I think what it all really comes down to is funding. We are not funding these systems appropriately to match the rate of population growth in Texas. And so, we're trying to put more money into additional psychiatric hospital beds, but it's not enough. Like, it's nowhere near enough to meet the needs, even if we fully funded all of them. And so it's kind of just this breakdown of not prioritizing community mental health care, inpatient mental health care at the state level, and that just trickles down. And so there's nowhere for people to go when they need help.
Right. And of course, Texas is not alone in having this issue. It's a nationwide one. You reported on so many tragic cases and painted a grim picture, but the impact has been stunningly positive. And tell us about some of the responses from government and the industry that makes us hopeful.
Yeah, so we really tried to time this project right before the legislature went in session, so they didn't forget about it, basically. And so they reacted pretty quickly. I think, a couple days after my first story ran, there were some bills that were filed to kind of address sort of this this we're not really sure what's going on, and there's so many people on the wait list, and they tried to put a couple things in place through bills to make things more transparent as well, to kind of make the violations, the state and federal violations, more accessible to normal Texans, as opposed to me, who had to file records requests and fight for them and everything. Neither of those passed, unfortunately. However, they did dump about $400 million into a plan to add more psychiatric hospitals, or more psychiatric beds to the state hospitals. Again, it's not enough, but it is a step. It's a good step, I think. And I hope that they continue to take those steps in the next session.
Right. So it's a start, and there's a lot more to be done. How do you keep the story in front of the public and government, and put a spotlight on this issue and possible solutions?
Yeah, so I've since this ran, I've just continued to write these stories. It's kind of like this cycle that I can't really get out of. Yeah, so I've just continued to kind of hammer home, like, here's another problem with the system. Here's another problem with the system. I think a lot of times in journalism, we come out with this big project and we're like, okay, we did it, we're done. And I just don't like that approach. Like, I just think that, like, in order to see real change, we can't just like let these big issues fall to the wayside. And so I'm lucky in the fact that my bosses have been like, yeah, that's fine, whatever you want. They haven't pulled me off it yet. So I've just continued to write about it. And hopefully it sticks in people's minds more that way.
Well, and you've pointed toward many ways that could help relieve the problems. A lot of forward spin here and solutions. David Kotak, the retired editor of the Omaha World Herald, had this to say: Alex Stuckey's brilliant, beautifully written, heart-tugging investigation uses narrative of individual patients to make sad and maddening points of suffering untreated. And she gives officials a chance to answer for the problems. Alex, thanks for sharing the story behind the story, and congratulations again for this well-deserved award.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
On our site, headlinersfoundation.org, you can link to this winning series and to interviews with other award-winning Texas journalists. For my colleague and Headliners Forum producer, Gary Pickle, I'm Mark Morrison.